second lecture. And it's my pleasure to introduce Elena Bárcena. I think you all know that she's a professor at the University of Malaga, where she also got her PhD in 2001. Of course, it was a PhD in applied economics. Before that, she had done a master. She got a master degree in the London School of Economics. This master was in econometrics and mathematical economics. So if you look just to this education profile, you already know a little bit also what comes next about Elena, because she sort of joins a very rigorous and formal mathematical background and kind of work with the applied part, right? The applied economics part, and with a lot of attention to societal problems, I would say. So I think this is already a good picture of Elena. I have here some notes, some additional notes. She is like the treasurer of the Society for the Study of Economic Inequality, the associate editor of the Journal of Economic Inequality, also associate editor of the Hacienda Pública Española, forgive me for my Spanish. And so this is what I could read. Then I also did a clustering of Elena's articles, tried to organize, and I identified 7, maybe Elena does not agree with me, but I identified 7 articles which I consider like more conceptual articles with the kind of stuff that Frank was showing us, axiomatizations, things about measuring indices, generalizations of Bonferroni inequality indices, and so on. So these are more conceptual ones, and then others more applied to specific inequality and poverty issues, like I found 5 or something like that related to gender gap and intra-household decisions. I joined them together, otherwise I would have too many clusters. And also 4 articles related with child deprivation and child poverty, 2 articles on COVID, but related with vulnerabilities and also deprivation. And I also found 2 in tourism. I mean, it's not so much related with the theme of our conference, but in very good journals in tourism economics. So it's a very diversified portfolio, I'd say. But I don't want to spend more time, because Elena has a very nice paper to present us, measuring the 2030 Agenda's principle of leaving no one behind. So the floor is yours, and I'll go there to listen careful to what you have to say.
Thank you for the nice presentation, and thank you also for inviting me to give this lecture. That is my first plenary lecture, so forgive me for all the mistakes. And it's wonderful to talk after Frank Cowell. The keynote lecture, Frank Cowell and Jack Silver are co-authors, so I have worked with them, and I appreciate a lot what I have learned from them. And you will see that my lecture has some connotations and some relations with their work. And also I was a student of Frank Cowell at the Master of the LSE, where I think he was the first one in talking me about economic inequality and so on. So you can see that there is a strong relation with the other co-authors. So today we are going to talk about this principle that is on the 2030 agendas, and what we try to do in all this lecture, that is a compendium of different articles, is to show you a proposal is nothing more than a proposal to measure or to approach to this principle that is in this agenda. It is not something that we try to substitute what is on the literature, but to complement the information we have. Well, as you all know, in the 17 development goals, we have different varieties of goals that goes from poverty and inequality in the 10th, but there is other topics, but above all of them is the principle of leave no one behind. Because the states have recognized that the objectives and goals of the agenda must be met for all nations and individuals and for all segments of society. That means that they try to arrive to those who are more left behind, countries or individuals, to achieve all those goals. Okay, there are some reasons, interesting concerns that allows us to think about leaving no one behind, because we can see that if someone is left behind, he's denied certain economic and social rights to education, to health, to a decent level of life. So in terms of roles, we could say that people who are left behind do not enjoy equal primary goods, or in terms of saying, we could say they do not enjoy equal basic capabilities. Or in terms of Roma, we would say that they do not enjoy equal opportunities. So there are reasons to think about those who are left behind, but also there are also instrumental reasons to focus on them, because only development will be faster if we arrive to those who are left behind before. So focusing on those left behind, we are going to fight against inequality and poverty, but we are going to speed the growth, and we will reduce tension and political stability, and we will work for cohesion. So there are reasons to think about those who are left behind. But we think, what does it mean? How can we say that an individual is left behind, and how much is an individual left behind? This is recognized by Clausen and Fleury in 2018, and they recognize that in practice, it is not clear what are we talking about when we talk about the left behind. So the aim, or along all this presentation, is to propose this measure that is going to measure the degree to which an individual is left behind. And when we talk about being left behind, we are not talking about levels only, but also about the distribution of power, of income, of wealth, and so on. In the literature, we can find different measures that have tried to focus on those left behind in different sense. For example, the first one is something that is very known by you, that is the head count ratio. So we are counting the poor. How many people of all those who are in the income distribution are below this poverty line? So we are going to count how many of those are in relation of that. Okay, this is a good measure to communicate. It's simple, but it has some drawbacks. As you know, when we try to reduce this number, this headcount ratio, we can only focus on those who are close to the poverty line, let them jump overpass this poverty line, and then we will reduce the number of poor. But we are leaving people behind. We can also work with the poverty gap. The poverty gap, I'm sure most of you know the definition, but it's not much that the average distance of the incomes of the poor with respect to the poverty line. In this respect, there are incentives to focus on the lower part of the distribution and move them closer to the poverty line. But then we can find another kind of disadvantage. This is when those closer to the poverty line jump the poverty line, then the poverty gap can increase. So we could have incentive on not jumping the poverty line. So this measure, maybe it is not such convenient. In a dynamic setting, we have the proposal of the World Bank of the measure of shared prosperity that is going to compare the growth of those at the bottom part of the distribution with the growth of all those on the population. The bottom part of the distribution has evolved a long time. In the beginning, it was the 20%, then they define it as 40%, but we can find also some disadvantages in this definition. Imagine that we are in a riding race and we have all those riders. What we are going to do with this shared prosperity measure is just to focus on this 40% and see if it has moved in comparison with the overall race, let's say that. But we can find that when we focus on the 40%, we have different situations. So there is an heterogeneous group, heterogeneous behavior that can be masked by this measure. We need something more specific, not something so aggregated. D'Ambrosio and Frick in 2012, and Bosser and D'Ambrosio in 2020 also talk about being left behind. In this case, they have also a definition in dynamic terms, but this definition has another sense. They define that, again, with the sample with a race. Imagine that we have this race and the blue rider is now leading the race. So they identify that those who are left behind are those two that were at the top of the race, on the head of the race. So they have another image of what is to be left behind. So from this review of what we have in the literature, we can say that what we want for our measure. We don't want an aggregate measure. We want something that can allow us to assess to what extent an individual is left behind. So we avoid the aggregate measure. We don't want to focus just on one part of the distribution and ignore the other part of the distribution. So we try to avoid threshold. And then we would like to give a measure for each individual of the extent to which each individual is left behind, not only to identify them, but to give a measure. And also following the recommendations of the European Statistical System Sponsorship Group, we have some recommendations that we try to follow. These are that we try to measure outcomes instead of the process, intermediate process. We try to measure inequalities through distribution statistics instead of averages. We try to collect data at the individual level, as I said before, rather than aggregated values. And we try to reflect inequalities by subgroup, by age or by education level or income level or wherever. So with these lines in mind, and knowing that the concept of being left behind can have some kind of ambiguity, and we want to preserve this ambiguity, because as Sen said, a precise representation of an ambiguous concept must preserve the ambiguity, we work with the fuzzy sets. So we go to the definition of SADE, and we try to tackle the problem in which ambiguity plays a fundamental role. So a little bit of theory, but I can explain without this formulation if you prefer. If we have a set, that we call it U, a fuzzy set A that belongs, that is built on U, is characterized by a membership function that goes from 0 to 1. So it gives a number between 0 and 1. What we have is, imagine that you are all the individuals in a society. Imagine that the fuzzy set is who are left behind, the left behind, and the membership functions is going to give us a number between 0 and 1, identifying to what extent an individual is left behind. So the crucial thing in this fuzzy set is to find a specific membership function that gives us this degree of being left behind. And for this, we go to the literature and we go to the Hay and Lambert definition of relative deprivation. In terms of Hay and Lambert, we say that the relative deprivation of individual I with an income, X sub I, with respect an individual J with income X sub J, is the difference between their incomes. If the individual I is comparing with has greater income and 0 otherwise. So when I'm comparing in the distribution with all of you, I'm looking to those who are richer than me, and then I compute the difference. And if you are poorer than me, I'm not taking you into account. This is the relative deprivation, and the mean relative deprivation of an individual I is just the average of all those differences in the population. There are a lot of zeros if you are higher in the income distribution because the comparison with those who are below are 0. So I'm going to use this mean relative deprivation as a way of membership function, but I need to compute some changes to allow this formulation to be between 0 and 1. That was one of the characteristics of this membership function. So the membership functions we are going to use is this LB, that is the mean deprivation relative to the mean income of the distribution. And if we see, it depends on two terms, two products. The first one is the proportion of people richer than I. And the second one is the average share of all those who are richer than individual I compared with the share of individual I. So what we can say is you are more left behind, the more people is richer than you, and the more they have. Okay, something that can make sense is something that is between 0 and 1. And this is our membership function. Obviously, we can compute this figure for each individual of the population. So, again, if we go to our distribution, we have all these 10 individuals. If we focus on the first individual, he's leading the distribution, so he is not left behind. So he will receive a 0. If we focus on this, that is on the 7th position, he's a little bit left behind. We are comparing his income with that of those who are richer than them. So he is left behind with degree 0.09. And if we go lower in the distribution, we have that this other individual is left behind with a degree 0.58. To get a degree of 0 is not so easy because you have to have 0 income. It's the only way to have a 0. So not for being just the poorest in the distribution are you going to get a 0. You need to have 0 income, right? Okay, this measure that we have proposed satisfy much of the actions that Frank Howell has presented in the previous lecture, so I can avoid to develop all these actions. We say that this measure is anonymous, so what matters is just the variable we are looking at. I have given example of income, but it can be income, wealth, any measure, any variable that is continuous. If it is not continuous, I will tell you what can we do. Then, it is a scale invariant, so it does not matter what is the unit of the variable we are measuring. It is replication invariant. This is useful to make comparisons between population with different sizes. Then it decreases with income or with the variable we are measuring. So the more you have, the less deprived you are. And it is a strong convex. This is a very important action because it is going to decrease to a certain rate, and this rate depends on your position and on the difference of your income. Finally, it satisfies minimality and maximality. That means that it has a minimum and a maximum. It's going to be between 0 and 1. If we find a measure that just satisfies strong convex, minimality, and maximality, it is the one we have presented. So it is axiomatically characterized, this measure. Just this is to try to convince you that it more or less makes sense. Okay. Let's move to the illustration. To illustrate our measure, what we are going to do is to work with the 3 dimensions of the at risk of poverty and social exclusion. But we could work with any other kind of dimensions. We have then income, we have material deprivation, and we have work intensity. Income and work intensity are continuous variables. For those who are not familiarized, income is okay, is defined, but work intensity is a ratio between the total number of months that working-age household members have worked during the income reference year compared to the total number of months that the same household member theoretically could have worked in the same period. So if I work full-time and I have a partner, the only other member of my household at working age that works part-time, then my work intensity would be 0.75. Okay. Then we have this dimension of material deprivation that has, in the new definition, material and social deprivation has 13 items. That some of them are at household level, some of them are at individual level. And they try to measure the capacity to face unexpected expenses, capacity to afford paying for 1 week annual holiday away from home, and so on. And at the individual level, having internet connection, replacing worn out clothes by some new ones, and so on. If you think about these 13 items, what I finally have is the number of items that I lack. If I lack 7 of 13 or 2 out of 13 or whatever, the number of items I lack is not a continuous variable. So when we are trying to work with those non-continuous variables, we need to transform this variable. And what we do? Well, we go to the literature and do a usual transformation in fuzzy set theory. That is the one proposed by Kelly and Lemmy that I will explain in a minute. First, imagine that we have those 13 items. We know that in EU Silk we have they lack or they not lack this income, and they usually refer as enforced lack of the item. But imagine that we could have even more than 2 categories. Imagine that we can say, can you face unexpected expenses? And you say, yes, of at most 500 or at most 1,000 euros or whatever. And so you can classify these symptoms of each item. Well, what we need to do first is to order these items from the most deprived, the one that shows that you are most deprived, to the one you are, that shows you are the less deprived or not deprived. Then you make this transformation that is just to compute a ratio and to have a measure that is bounded. This is proposed by Kelly and Lemmy. And then when we have this transformation for the 13 items, we have to aggregate the information of the items. And in this step, we introduce weights. Why to introduce weights? Because it's not the same to lack an item that everyone in the population has. So I need to give more weight to the lack of an item that is everyone in your population has. Imagine that I don't have a car and every one of you have a car. It is more strong than if I lack internet and none of you have internet. So I weight more the items that are more frequently, that more people in the population has, and we try to reduce the effect of those dimensions that have some overlapping with other dimensions. So this weight, W upper B, will weight the dimensions depending on the information that they provide. Well, once we have all these weights and this transformation, we compute only one value for each individual for the 13 dimensions. And then in that transformation, we can apply the LB membership function that we talked before. Well, if we do all this, now what we have are 3 dimensions, 3 measures of the degree an individual is left behind in income, in material deprivation, and in work intensity. And we know we need to aggregate. And we have a lot of different possibilities to aggregate the information. We could use the maximum, the minimum, an average, wherever. In this illustration, we have used the minimum following the philosophy of the at risk of poverty and social exclusion definition that defines an individual as at risk of poverty if they lack at least one of the 3 dimensions. It lacks, no, if it follows below the threshold in each of the 3 in any of the 3 dimensions. So we took the minimum, but I will show that the results are very, very, very robust to the way we are aggregating. Well, if we compute and give an overall measure of the degree an individual is left behind, making me note that this is not the intention of the measure, because we were saying that we try to skip the overall measure, we try to go to the individuals and so on, but as a general result, we have this graph where we have on the horizontal axis, we have the at risk of poverty and social exclusion rate as it is computed in Eurostat. And on the vertical axis, we have the degree in on average individuals in different countries are left behind. And what we find is that obviously there are a positive relationship, but we can find countries with more or less the same number of people or proportion of people at risk of poverty, but with different degree, the individuals are left behind. It means we are capturing some kind of information that is over the threshold or that is on the extent to which each individual is left behind, and now we are able to capture. Obviously, we also have the opposite sign. So we can have countries with different levels of at risk of poverty that has more or less the same level of degree the individuals are left behind. And this only means that there is some kind of compensation with those who are over the threshold. But the important thing is that we are not trying to work with those overall measure. What we try to work is with the individual measure, as I will show later. Just to show that the way we are aggregating the information is not very important because the ranking of the different countries is more or less the same. There are only small re-ranking between the position of countries with respect to the degree individuals are left behind on average. We have Greece, Spain, Italy, and Lithuania as those who leave more people behind, while we have Czech Republic and Iceland as those who leave people less behind. But as I said, the important thing of this measure is that we can we can take the measure at the individual level. So the important thing is that we can decompose by socio-demographic characteristics. So let me explain with this picture what we are doing when we are dividing by socio-demographic characteristics. Imagine that you have the green lady here on the left. She is going to compare with all those because they are better off than them. And this other lady is going to compare also with those who are better than them. When I will show you the picture of how far are left behind women, what we are doing is comparing women with all those who are better off than them, men or women. So we are not comparing women only with women, because one thing that we believe is that you are left behind no matter your characteristics. But you can group the information with characteristics to show you if women are more left behind than men and so on. Well, what is the picture of Spain in 2021? I will show you some picture for Portuguese, okay? Also for France, but it's just to illustrate. Okay, in Spain, we have, as is expected, that those left behind are jobless households. Those households where no one is working are more left behind than non-jobless households. Also, households with children, with a small difference with respect to the rest of the households. Then we have single parents. We have multi-unit households that are those households where people, at least 3 generations of individuals live. So usually are children with parents and grandparents. You know that in Spain is a way of a family net to join people together. So we have that people in multi-unit household are much more left behind than people with no multi-unit household. But we see that multi-unit household are variable. Here are the confidence interval. It means that not all multi-unit households are so bad. There are some variation. We have also that those who own their household are less left behind. Women and men has not such a difference because, as I told you, we are working at household level. So intra-household distribution of resources are not taken into account, so we don't know. And the only difference comes mainly from those households who are only one adult household. So a small proportion in the distribution to show the difference here. Then we have those suffering chronic illnesses are more left behind. By education, the higher the level of education, the lower you are left behind. And by age, we have that the most left behind are the older people, then younger people, and then middle-aged people. One way to exploit, to make advantage of the information we have is to look at the 20% of those who are left behind. I have chosen 20%, we could have chosen any other portion, but let's think about the proportion of people that we usually have in Spain as poor, 20% more or less. So we can say, okay, from this bottom, 20% of those who are left behind, which are their characteristics with respect to the population. And what we have is, when I the O is the overall population, the proportion, for example, of women that we have in the overall population is 0.49. On the top 20 of those who are more left behind is 0.51, so the prevalence is 1.04, okay? So which are the characteristics that are less represented in those on the more left behind? Well, middle-aged individuals, high-educated individuals, and owners of households. Those who are more prevalent among them is single parents and jobless households. So what we have seen in Spain for 2021 is the same in every country. But then we can exploit by country, which is the most common overrepresented individual in the top 20%. And we have that Italy, Luxembourg, and Portugal has older individuals as those more left behind, while, for example, the Czech Republic has illness, people with chronic illnesses. So we can focus the attention on those profiles that need to have some policy intervention. We could also see how can those who are left behind evolve across time. So we would need to have this evolution. And we can see, and this time I am comparing Spain and Portugal. Spain is with the blue and Portugal is on orange. We have this evolution from 2014 to 2021. I've chosen this period, the longest period finishing at 2021, and the earliest one is 2014, because before we had no information on the relative deprivation items, so we should stop or start at 2014. How the individuals have evolved? Well, we see that between Spain and Portugal, both of them, jobless households, are less left behind in the population, and there are no significant differences between them. Not also in a single parent household, multi-unit household, and a younger household, but there are differences in households with children. In that case, we have that Spain has reduced the level individuals or households with children are left behind, but Portugal has done even better. Then we have women, where women has been left behind, reduced the degree they are left behind, but much more in Portugal, also for people with chronic illnesses and for primary education. So we can compare how people is evolving depending on sociodemographic characteristics, but also by decile. In this graph, what we have are the 10 deciles, and in the vertical axis, we have the level of being left behind by decile in each country. So in 2014, Spain and Portugal has more or less similar levels of being left behind in the different deciles, maybe a slight difference in the middle incomes. Then in 2021, there is a slightly more evident difference. And this is, here we have the differences. Here, this is because Spain and Portugal has reduced the number, the extent to which individuals are left behind, more on the left-hand side of the distribution, but much more in Portugal than in Spain, that is at this level. So if we look at those two profiles, we would say that Portugal is behaving better or is growing with a shared prosperity more better than the one in Spain. What happened in France, for example? Well, we have France. The differences were big in 2014 and were smaller in 2021. We could think that, okay, this is because we have approached France. We have moved. And it is not, because the reason why we are now much closer is because the bottom part of the distribution is being more left behind in France. And maybe we can think about the recent riots and so on, no? We could think about that. And in Spain, we have reduced the level individuals are left behind in the bottom part of the distribution. And finally, we get that the mean level to which individuals are left behind in Spain reduced and in France increased. So we have a lot of information we can exploit from this measure, but we can exploit even more. We have this information that we have worked by subgroups, but we can work with this information by individuals. Obviously, we can do regressions and so on, but in this dynamic setting of how people has evolved, the degree they are left behind, we can work with this information at individual level. Let's think a fixed population. Obviously, if we are going to talk about being left behind, we need at least 2 people in the population. So n must be bigger or equal to 2. Then we have 2 different income distribution. I could talk about x sub 1 or x sub 0. I don't call it y as Cowell. I don't know why, but I call it x. X, so the income distribution at time 0 and at time 1 would be income distribution in the initial and in the final period. Then we have the mean income of each period, and LB would be the degree an individual is left behind. Okay, we can think about how an individual, a specific individual, changed the level he is left behind, as it is no more than a subtraction of these 2 formulations. Here we have to note that we have 2 reference groups. Remember that in the formulation, we have this mu plus xi that I told you that it was the income share of all those who are above you in the distribution. Obviously, if we have 2 time periods, we have 2 different reference periods. Maybe there are a lot of people that are richer than you in 2 periods, but maybe some of them are not longer there, or some of them have joined your reference group. So we have to take into account that we have 2 different reference groups. And we are going to try to divide this difference and decompose in 2 terms. One is re-ranking and the other is progressivity. To work with that, we need to look at this example. Look, this is x sub 0, so it's the income distribution at time 0, where individuals are ranked in ascending order. We have those individuals here, and then at time 1, we have all the incomes, again, arranged in ascending order. So some individuals have changed position. Let's think about this artificial distribution that is income at time 1, but with the order that they had at time 0. So if I go, the first one would be individual 1 that has income 8. The second one has income 12. As you see, they should not, or they not need to be arranged in ascending order. And we can compute here the same membership function. If we work with this membership function and we do this computation, just subtract and sum this artificial term, what we have is the first term that is re-ranking. If you look at this, these are incomes at time 1, and the only thing that changed from here to here is the order of the individuals. So this term capture the ranking of the individuals. And in the second terms, what we have is the same order of the individuals. They are ordered as the income at time 0, and this time we are comparing different incomes, time 0 and time 1. So this is the progressivity term. This decomposition is inspired by Silver, 1985, and Jenkins and Van Kern, 2006, that do something similar for the decomposition of the Gini index. If we work out a little bit this formulation, we end up with all this expression that we are going to analyze step by step. Look that we have re-ranking, and then we subtract progressivity. Well, let's look first at progressivity. This is the expression that was there. What we have in this expression is, on the one side, own income growth, how you have growth, okay? In the other one, you have how your reference group at time 0 has growth. So what you are comparing is your own growth with the growth of your reference group, and you will be more left behind the less you growth and the more the other growth, or the other way around. You will be less left behind if you growth a lot, much more than your reference group. So we have a term that allows us to evaluate your own income in comparison with the others. And then we have the re-ranking. And here we have to take into account that we have a lot of reference group. Okay, we said that we have 2 reference groups, those at time 0, those at time 1. We are going to divide like in a table. So those who were below or above you at both times, those are called GAA, above you at time 0 and above you at time 1. Those above you at time 0 and not at time 1. Those below you at time 0 and above you at time 1. And if we compute all those expressions, we end up with this one that is no more that the ranking is the proportion of individuals that overpass you compared with the proportion of individuals that are overpassed by you. So you are better than them from one period to the other. And the weights that we give to those formulations. Okay. So now we are going to do an applied work to know how we can work with all this information. We study annual income changes in Spain from 2009 to 2020. I choose this period because it's the period where there was a change in the methodological way of computing income, and from 2009 to 2020 is the same way of computing assessing income in the survey. We use a Spanish living conditions survey. We have the income variable, so it's post-tax, post-transfer income. We use the modified OECD scale. When we call or when we refer to income growth, we are referring to year-on-year changes. We report estimates on data trim, so the top and bottom 1% are in each pair has been top-coded, but we have done the same without this trim, and the result is the same. Calculations with no trimming at all were also undertaken. Data set is clean, dropping all 0 and negative incomes are not a lot of it's a small proportion of the survey. And we are going to use longitudinal weights. Those familiarized with the USILT know that we need to compute weights on the longitudinal as well as in the cross-sectional files. And I will present results by income classes. And when we call income classes I call lower class, those on the bottom part of the distribution, those who are below the 75% of the median. Then we will call, or we will refer to lower middle class, those between 75 and 125. Then 125 and 200 are the upper middle class, and the upper class are those with at least twice the median income. If we stay with the information we have for until now, we could say that if we look, if we look at the picture, we have this increase in the level individuals are left behind. That is also the same, that the difference between the Gini indexes in between those two periods. And we have these differences. We see that there are years, 2012 to 2013 and 19 to 20, where the inequality or the degree individuals are left behind increase, and other years where this degree individuals are left behind has reduced. And with the decomposition proposed by Jack Silver or by Jenkins and Van Kerm, we could say that re-ranking is almost the same in all years, and what makes the difference is the progressivity. So people growing, or people on the bottom part growing more than people on the upper part of the distribution. But we can go a step further and we can see specifically how each individual has evolved, re-ranking and progressivity of each individual. As I cannot give you all the information of the 20,000 individuals I have aggregated them by income classes. And what we have is the following. We have here in blue line the degree individuals are left behind in the lower class and in the lower middle class. We see that along all these years, space of years, individuals on the bottom part of the distribution in Spain has been each time less left behind, so we are making progress. Those in the lower middle class has increased their degree, they are left behind, while for the upper middle and the upper class, they also increase the way they are left behind, and more or less to the same extent. If we compare the different terms of the decomposition, we have progressivity and re-ranking. How has this progressivity evolved? If we see the lower income class has the most progressivity. It means that those who are on the lower part of the distribution are increasing their income more than all those who are above them in the income distribution. While the others are also having progressivity, so all of them are increasing, but to a different extent. And the lower part is making progress with difference with respect to the others. Regarding the re-ranking, we have a conclusion that is common in the literature, that is the streams of the distribution are more stable. Well, in this case, it's the same. Lower part of the distribution, lower income class, and the upper class has less re-ranking, while middle incomes, lower or higher middle incomes, are increasing or has more re-ranking. And we can also compute how this progressivity that we have seen before, how much is due to own income growth or to income growth of the others. And what we have is for the lower class, we have that they are growing, and the reference group, this reference group is decreasing income. While for the lower middle class, it's not that they are not increasing, they are increasing, but the extent they are increasing their incomes is not compensating for the decrease the other are having. So we end up having progressivity, but to a lower extent. And for the upper middle and for the upper class, what we have is that upper middle class is reducing their incomes, and the others, those richer than them, are decreasing even more. And something similar, but with different differences, are happening in the upper class of the distribution. So we have different pictures. We can go deeper in our analysis of the evolution of the inequality or of the degree individuals are left behind. Even more, we don't need to decompose by incomes that are not overlapping subgroups. We can work, for example, with tertiary and non-tertiary educated people. If we look at the degree they are left behind, we can see that more or less people are reducing the degree they are left behind. A little bit were increasing for the first year. And if we look at the pandemic effect, we could say that tertiary educated people start to grow or be left behind later than those with non-tertiary education. And if we decompose this information, what we have is that progressivity is more greater for those on the tertiary educated, so they are growing more than non-tertiary educated people. Re-ranking is also greater for those on tertiary educated, and if we go to the decomposition between own growth and income growth or own income growth, we see that the main difference comes from own income growth of tertiary and non-tertiary educated people. So to conclude, what we have is a proposal of this measure of leaving no one behind that is based on individual observation and that we can explore a lot to get much more information and reflect inequalities. But it's just one proposal that needs to be a complement of other measures because this measure is not perfect as it happens in inequality. It's just a complement. So thank you very much.
There is now time for questions, so if you want. There is a question here. Microphone, please. There is no microphone. It's fine. Okay. You can use. Okay.
Are not observed, but they are important. And the other way around. There are many times that you are not able to observe dimensions. Well, you are able to observe dimensions, but they are a kind of redundant. In your method, as far as I have followed you talk, there's no such a thing like an optimization process to say instead of using 10, it would be much better to use, let's say, 5 or 15, whatever, or a kind of penalty in your function that penalizes the complexity of your measure, in the sense that the more dimensions you are using, the more complexity, the higher the complexity of your measures. I am also thinking about when you want to use your proposal for making international comparisons, ensure that the dimensions that you can observe it in those different countries is going to be quite different. Even using the same number of dimensions, some of them can be very different in one place to another. So I'm sure that you have given a large thought about this, but I would like you to explain what is behind.
Yes, thank you, Juan Gabriel. Your question is very interesting and is something we have thought about it, of course. And this is why when I presented the results, I said, we are going to show the dimensions of the at risk of poverty and social exclusion, because we didn't want to make an innovation on dimensions, because we, as you show us, we are aware that this decision is not a decision that you can make without a strong thought. And even when you talk about multidimensional poverty, you always have criticism about the dimensions you are measuring. So what I presented here is just an illustration of the measure, but obviously you have to be aware of the dimensions you are using and make a lot of robustness check. I am sure that if I introduce education in the measure, everything is going to change. I'm not so sure that if you compare one country with another, the differences are so big, because at least the countries we are measuring here are taken from the same survey, and it is supposed to have an homogenized way of taking the data. So for sure, dimensions matter, and maybe in some countries you should take care that the dimension is not the same than in others, not in the European, with the European Union survey of living conditions, but it's something that we have to work on it. Obviously, this is another topic. This is not the way of constructing an index, but the way of applying this index. So there is a lot of work to do. Thank you.
More questions? Microphone here.
Great presentation, especially for the first time. Really amazing. So thank you. I have a few questions. One is about, do you have in the data any indicator about emotions? Because I think it's play an important role in this. Then the other issue that I have is this immigration. If you look at immigration, people who immigrate to Spain and to France, they are totally different individuals. When they come to France, they are poor and whatever. When they come to Spain, they are rich. Now, some of your data is problematic in the sense that you are looking only at Spanish income, and you don't take into account all the other people that are residing in Portugal and so on, in Spain. And as a result, you know, the inequality is going up dramatically and so on. And the third point is about, did you think about a median voter in order to explain what is going on in your data?
Okay. Regarding the subjective perception of the situation, is one of the dimensions we can include in these dimensions. But I'm not sure if everyone agrees in introducing subjective perception in an indicator, because it is related to the place where you live. So, I mean, if we try to rank your perception of the place you are in the distribution in Spain is not the same if I go to Ghana. And so I'm not sure. In that case, it would be what Juan Gabriel has said about the same variable can measure different things in different countries. At least I should take a lot of computation and robustness check to see if things change. Sorry? Can have a dummy, yes. Well, I should think about it. Then the second one was about immigration, okay. When we work with this data, we don't say Spanish people, sorry, because I didn't say it. It's not Spanish as nationality, it's people who are in Spain. They can come from wherever they want. And I didn't show you the level they are left behind by nationality or by immigration, because when we have this longitudinal file, we don't have the information for all years on the nationality of the individual. So we could not compute for the change in the data. We can do it for the cross-sectional picture, and obviously what we find is that immigrants are more left behind in Spain and almost in every country except in Romania and Hungary, that Romania and Bulgaria, sorry, that they had people more left behind on native than on immigrant, but differences are not significant. So, what do you?
All the decision of inequality, the government is involved. All the decision of this inequality, the government is involved by having tax and the expenditures and so on and so on. So the question is, since you see in the median that they are affected differently, question is maybe it has to do with median voter. In other words, the government cares about, 51%.
I don't know how to answer your question, but I think that the information that we can provide to policymakers is rich enough to take care about everyone and not to limit to the median voter. Obviously, the government is the one who has voted the people, but I couldn't say more.
More
Thank
questions?
Well, good morning. I have two questions, one important, the other not. Two comments. The important comment is that I want to congratulate Elena for her great conference, and I want to take advantage of this opportunity to give thanks to her for being always ready for giving a hand to the association. So publicly, I want to thank you for all your support. And the non-important one comment is that I was wondering while you was talking if you have thought to complement your research using non-supervised clustering or supervised grouping with using bagging, random forest, boosting, and so on, because it could be another good way of identifying groups, especially the interest group for your research. It could solve the problem of transforming discontinuous in continuous to the aggregation of dimensions and so on. Maybe you could have a look to that. And the second one is, have you thought of importing from the financial field the bar, the value at risk, as for measuring the risk of poverty, of the quantity of poverty, that of richness, that it is at risk, but it could be a good idea. I thought I used it I exported it to the air pollution control, just to play a little bit. It was fantastic. Maybe you could try. Thank you very much, and the important thing is congratulations on your impressive conference. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you because you were the link to the invitation to this conference, so thanks to you. Regarding the reference groups, it is always a question that also has a lot of controversy, because reference group can be formed in different ways. One of them is usually in the literature of happiness and so on, they classified people by sex, gender, education, and so on. And you make reference only to this group when you make comparisons. But I don't think this is the case for being left behind, because it does not matter who you are, it matters what the other has. So no matter I am a woman, I'm not going to compare with a woman. I'm going to compare with all those who are above me. And no matter I am educated or not, I want to compare with all those who are educated or not. So obviously we can do many different ways of reference group, but I think the option of getting the greater population is the best. You can say, okay, but then you are comparing only people in Spain and not Spanish people or people in Spain with people in France. Yes, it's true that I have made the reference group as a country, not greater than that, because I think that in terms of income, we don't compare with people in Romania, for example. It's true that we can compare with people in Portugal or in France. We can do greater group of comparisons, and I think that matters for the final measure. But it's true that we should think a little bit more about that, or make clear that we are imposing a reference group that is greater than the usual in happiness, but smaller than if we say, I will compare with everyone in the world, no? Because at least we don't have information for all the world. And I cannot remember the other question. Sorry, I couldn't write it. Which was the other? Ah, okay. Yes, now I remember, yes. Yes, when we work on poverty, we always have this threshold, and we have the anonymity axiom. That means that only matters what happened below the threshold, and no matter what is happening over the threshold. This measure is avoiding this axiom, and we compute all the incomes along the distribution. As you said, there is a lot of people who are above this poverty threshold, but at risk of being below the threshold at some point in time. So we can call it insecurity or vulnerability or wherever. We would be in a topic that has been proposed to be measured with different indexes, the vulnerability or the insecurity. But obviously, this measure can allow us to say, okay, those who are above the poverty line, to what extent are they left behind? Maybe there is not much differences with those who are below the poverty line. So this is a problem. If they are much above the poverty line and they are less left behind, then this is not such a big problem. So obviously, this is a good point to make use of this measure in the future. Yes, of course. Thank you.
More questions? So if there are no more questions, I think it's time for lunch, right? It's in room 129. And I think we should all thank again Elena for the great lecture. It was a big pleasure. So a round of applause. You don't know me because I don't work in this area.
No, okay.
I'm
but it
again
doesn't
tourist and I do more industrial organization and things.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Do you know Adriana Alventosa? I think she was in Malaga for some time. Now she's in Valencia.
No, I know one that is Portuguese, that's Manuela.
Manuela?
Oh, I don't know the surname. And now she's in Malaga.
Ah, okay,
But,
okay, okay.
but no.
Not
no.
Adriana. She does experimental economics, and I have been working with her for some time. So, but I think she was in Malaga for very short
Maybe,
time.
maybe.
She was like initially from Valencia, then she went to
Yes.
Malaga, and then again to Valencia.
Ah, okay.